Committee will come to order. We're here today to receive testimony on 5 bills addressing Indian water rights settlements, 4 related to settlements, and 1 focused on the broader challenge of how do we finance them. S. 3573 from Senator Lujan would amend the Aamodt settlement in New Mexico to allow statutory deadlines for completing the Joaquin Basin regional water system to be extended when specified parties agree that more time is necessary. This is meant to prevent the settlement from failing due to construction delays. S. 3617 from Senator Kelly would ratify the Yavapai-Apache Nation settlement in Arizona. It would confirm their right to 4,610 acre-feet of water annually and authorize approximately $1.04 billion for the Craigien Verdane pipeline, a drinking water treatment plant and transmission system, and a tribal settlement trust fund. And then S. 4368 from Senator Padilla would ratify the Agua Caliente Band of Cahuilla Indian settlement with the Coachella Valley Water District and Desert Water Agency. It would confirm the tribe's right to produce or use up to 20,000 acre-feet of groundwater annually from the Indio sub-basin, provide funding to implement the settlement, and authorize federal land transfers. And also S. 4417 from Senator Padilla would update the previously enacted Pechanga settlement. It would ensure that settlement covers contiguous trust lands and allow the tribe's water quality account to support water quality projects in the Wolf Valley Basin. These settlements resolve long-standing claims, provide certainty to tribal and non-tribal water users, avoid costly litigation, and support communities that have waited far too long for reliable water infrastructure. But as I said at our hearing in March, we must ensure that they are structured for successful implementation. And that means confronting the difficult question of how these settlements are financed. The settlements before us, together with other settlements our committee has already heard or reported this Congress, represent nearly $13 billion in new federal spending. That's a lot of money. That is not a reason to abandon our trust responsibilities, but it does require Congress to identify a credible, sustainable, and realistic funding path. It also requires us to ensure that each settlement is reasonable in scope, clearly defined, and fully implementable by agencies and communities alike. We must be confident that the infrastructure commitments, timelines, and costs are achievable, and that we're not creating obligations that exceed practical or fiscal capacity. Through the bipartisan infrastructure law, Congress provided a once-in-a-generation investment of $2.5 billion to complete previously enacted Indian water settlements. That funding was historic and it was necessary, but it is now fully exhausted and will not be available to address the settlements now awaiting congressional action. In 2010, the stars aligned for passage of the Claims Resolution Act. Senators Kyle and Baucus, both members of the Finance Committee, helped bring together the settlement package and a budgetary offset that included an extension of customs user fees. And that cooperation allowed Congress to authorize and fund 4 major Indian water settlements, along with the Cobell and Pickford settlements. And then today, we have another proposal to establish a dedicated settlement fund, along with a related proposal to offset it through a similar extension of customs user fees. S. 4890, also from Senator Lujan, would establish 2 mandatory funding subaccounts within the Indian Water Rights Settlement Completion Fund, established by our bipartisan infrastructure law. One would provide $45 million annually for operation, maintenance, repair, and other continuing federal obligations under specified enacted settlements. The other would provide $250 million annually for newly enacted and continuing settlements. The question is whether that approach can provide the durable bipartisan solution these settlements require in today's environment. I think our goal should be to continue meeting our solemn trust and treaty responsibilities while maintaining fiscal responsibility and balancing the many priorities that face Indian country. That's what must be front of mind as we consider these measures and think about the future of Indian water rights settlements. So I want to thank our witnesses. I want to acknowledge our colleagues that are before the committee here today. I'll now turn to Vice Chairman Schatz for his opening comments.
Thank you, Chair Murkowski. And it was really good to see 2 colleagues here, Senators Kelly and Padilla, 2 of the members in the Senate who are not on this committee who advocate the most, generally speaking, for Indian country, but particularly for their tribe. So welcome. To date, Congress has enacted 35 Indian water rights settlements. 16 new settlements or amendments are currently pending before Congress, and more than a dozen tribes are in active settlement negotiations with the Department of the Interior. The bills on today's agenda add to this growing list. 4 would settle or address Indian water rights claims to ensure access to much-needed clean and reliable drinking water for tribes and the surrounding communities. We all know that it is Congress's obligation to consider legislation that ratifies new Indian water rights settlements or amends existing settlements. But that is not where our obligation ends. We must also ensure that paper water turns into wet water. That is, that there is sufficient funding to actually deliver water to tribal and surrounding communities. And yet, for years, progress on advancing these settlements and delivering water has been stalled primarily due to a lack of adequate funding from the Congress. And so it's important that we're also considering Senator Lujan's bill to ensure that both existing and future Indian water settlements have a stable source of funding. But there is a concern, particularly among Republican colleagues in the House, that Indian water rights settlements cost too much. They insist on no new spending despite our trust and treaty obligation, forcing tribes to identify pay-fors to offset the cost of their legal and moral right to the water to sustain their homelands and their citizens. This is not right. So I appreciate that the DOI is here to testify today. As a party to all Indian water settlements, it is vital to have the department's views on the record, especially on the cost. And I'm glad DOI is sitting next to tribal leaders representing their communities that have waited years to finally resolve their water rights claims and can speak to the urgency of ratifying or amending these settlements. The committee and Congress must closely consider these bills before us and advance other water rights settlement bills that have passed out of this committee. I look forward to working with the committee and Indian country to find solutions that work for everyone. I want to thank the chairman for convening this hearing and our witnesses for being here today.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Schatz. Before we turn to our witness panel, we do have Senator Kelly and Senator Padilla here to make some remarks on their bills, but also to introduce the witnesses from your states. So, Senator Kelly, why don't you lead off and welcome both of you to the committee.